Is Dan Watson sitting in today for Jay Zimbauer with this edition of Car Time Radio. Boy, I tell you, and I am barely getting in here through this downpour of rain. I feel like maybe if I'd been a duck, it would have been a lot of fun. But lots of water out there, so be careful on the streets. It does get a little bit hydroplaning when you get water standing like it is out there on some of these roads, so be careful. Now today, sitting in for Jay as usual, I'll just preface this show with telling you that I am not a certified mechanic, and I'll entertain your questions that have to do with oil, lubrication, fuel additives, filtration, those kind of things. I am a certified lubrication specialist from the STLE. That's where I'd like to stay. I do every once in a while on the show get some questions about automotive repairs, and I think that kind of, if you like the yellow brick road, we can take a walk down that that path and see where we end up, but I don't think it would be the best advice you could get. So stick with the oil questions, and we can have a good time. The phone numbers here, they rattle them off for you, but I'm going to give them to you again because I'd really like to get some calls today, guys, make this show move right along. 407, I think it's 674-1025, such eyes I have in my youth. And then toll-free, 855-545-1025. So I got them here closer. I'm a little discombobulated coming in out of the downpour, but I'll get myself straight and squared away. Each time that I come in to do the show, I try to have some type of informative background talk about oil and its situation. Well, one of the things that came up this week, which I thought I would talk a little bit about on the show today in between the calls, and that is octane ratings of gasoline and what they mean, and in some cases why you should probably stick with the one recommended in your owner's manual for your car and not necessarily move on to a different octane. So, as always, I'm going to give the calls priority, so we'll come back to octane after the call or in between the next couple of calls. So that's what we'll do. And we're going to go right to Ron from Altamont Springs. Ron, what can I do for you?
Transmission fluid. I've got a 2008 Grand Marquis. Owned a 2002 before that, and a 95 before that. I'm going to change the transmission fluid now. On the 95 and the 2002, when I changed the transmission fluid, I dropped the fan and hit the filter and everything. And on those models, on the torque converter, you could bump the engine around, and there's like a little drain plug on the torque converter, so you could drain everything out of the transmission. I've noticed on the 2008, it doesn't have that little drain plug on the torque converter. So my question is, how do you get all the transmission fluid out of there if you can't drain the torque converter? And how much of a concern is that? And I'll hang up and listen.
Okay, that is a very good question. It comes up all the time, and I'll answer it in two different directions. The first one is that you could go down to one of the tire stores or one of the places that has a transmission flush or exchange machine, and they'll get everything out of the torque converter by simply doing a feed and bleed exchange type operation. Now, if you don't want to pay for that, then what you're going to have to do is what we used to do many times years ago in the past. You can operate your transmission, take usually the return hose that comes back to the transmission from the cooler that is usually in the bottom of the radiator. Now, that hose that comes back to the transmission, you break it loose. It's usually got a little solid elbow at the end where it connects, and it breaks loose fairly easy. And then if you will idle your car and the transmission in park or neutral and watch that hose. Now, you need to put it in about a 5-gallon bucket, a large enough bucket. And if you can't get a bucket under the car because you can't raise the car like that, make sure you have a flat pan that will hold at least 3 gallons of liquid, because you're going to end up pumping the oil out of the transmission through the return line, and it will pretty much empty everything in the transmission. Now, many people are concerned, well, wait a minute, I'm going to be running my transmission without oil. No, you're really not. it's going to pump out what's left in the torque converter and push it all out. Now, there are some times in some situations where people report that once they had pumped out what was in the pan, it seemed to stop flowing, having a hard time getting out what's in the torque converter. That may be true, but I think for your Ford that we're talking about here, it's pretty simple. You break that hose loose, put it into something that'll hold about 3 gallons, and you're going to pump about 11 quarts going to pump out of that transmission. And then drop the pan and do what you would normally do. Clean the pan, put on a new filter, put on a new gasket, get everything set up to go, put it back in place, and then you'll refill it by the normal method, pour it in the downspout. But what you want to do is pour it in. You'll pretty much get the pan kind of full with 5 or 6 quarts, and then you need to start up the car and let it idle in park or neutral so that it fills the torque converter up, sucking it out of the pan so that you can put more oil in the pan. So it's the old procedure that we've used for years before they came out with the exchange machines at the tire stores. So I hope that answers the question. I'm going to go right on over to George in Orlando. What can I do for you, George?
Hey, how are you, sir?
Good.
I got a 1944 coupe with a 48 Mercury flathead on it.
I know what those are.
What oil should I use on that?
Well, what you want to use in that engine is something that has what we call a good, solid, high zinc and phosphorus content, because that engine runs what we call flat tappet valve system, cam and push rods, and that's long before the hydraulic lifters and everything else. So you have solid lifters, push rods, and a camshaft. And in order to protect...
It doesn't have push rods. It's just got the lifter. The lifter comes straight off the cam onto the valve.
Okay, so you got an overhead cam in that particular model. Okay.
Breaking up bad.
Yep. I'm thinking of the ones with the push rods, but it doesn't really matter. That engine's designed for a good 40-weight oil. Still recommend high zinc and phosphorus because that engine is the parts that are in it are not made to put up with this very thin, low zinc phosphorus oil that we run in these new cars.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you can run anybody's 40 weight that you want,
right.
But in order to find one that still has a good additive package in it, you would need to look around and not use one that's rated as an SN oil. The new ratings of SN are limited in zinc and phosphorus by the Environmental Protection Agency of how much they can put in it.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to go back and find an oil that does not have any higher rating than SL on the bottle. SL oils were not restricted in zinc and phosphorus. You'll get a good dose of that. Now, what you're going to probably have to do is look for a 1540 diesel oil to find what you're looking for.
Really?
Yeah, because the diesel oils you find what's called a CI4 plus heavy-duty diesel oil, and it's got a very robust additive package in it that will satisfy the needs of that engine.
But back in the day, when, years ago, what did they use before all this synthetics and all this stuff?
Oh, you can use a petroleum in that engine. I didn't say you had to use a synthetic. They used good petroleum base oils, but quite frankly, the oils back World War II time were absolutely, you calm the big stuff out of the crude oil and make it look fairly decent and pour some sulfur in it and call it motor oil. I mean, it was really poor oil, and on most of those vehicles, they changed it at either 800 or 1,000 miles. You just drained it all out and put some more in because it was so the oil itself had so many contaminants in it. It wasn't cleaned up very well at the refinery, and so any oil you use today would be 100% better than what it was in 1940.
Can you use Amsoil?
Yeah, if you're going to use Amsoil, what I recommend is that you look for they're called Z-Rod oil, and they were made for what's called muscle cars and things from the 60s and 70s, and very high zinc, and you're going to want to run either a 40 weight or a 50 weight in that car, not a 30 weight.
Ain't that too thick?
Not for that engine. The clearances in that engine are built for 40-weight oils right out of the get-go. Now, if you've rebuilt it and changed anything, then I can't say on that. But if it's got the original bearings and clearances in it, it was built for a 40-weight oil.
Okay.
Yeah,
Well,
it's
thank
just
you very much, sir.
there was virtually no really lightweight engine oils in the 40s. Everything was 40-weight and 50-weight oil because all those engines are what we would consider today very loosely built. Not very many tight clearances in them.
Right.
All right. Well, I hope that answers the question for you. All right, folks, we're headed right up against a break. We'll break for some messages, and when we come back, I'll pick back up on telling you about octane of fuel. And welcome back to Car Time Radio. Dan Watson sitting in for Jay Zimbauer today with this edition. And as I said before the first segment, I am an oil lube specialist, not a mechanic specialist. So call me and ask me questions about lube oil, transmission oil, motor oil, gear oil, outboard motor oil, two-stroke oil, lawnmower oil, anything that you lubricate, and we'll talk about that. And I said I was going to spend a little bit of time talking about octane and what it means because I got questions on this during the week, and it always comes up. Here's the question that I get many times. My car owner's manual says I should run 87 octane fuel. Would I be better off running 89, 91, or 93 octane fuel? Would I get better fuel economy and better performance by paying the extra money for the higher octane fuel? Now, that's a good question, but first we have to back up for a minute and explain what octane means. If a fuel has an octane rating of 87 versus 93, what is the difference that we're working on here? Well, octane is actually defined as the rate or the speed of the burn of the fuel, how quickly the fuel burns. You say, well, what is that trying to mean? Well, what we don't want in the combustion chamber is an actual detonation, an explosion. What we really want is a rapidly expanding gas ball. So octane tells me if I have very low octane rating, the fuel will detonate and explode. If I have a very high octane rating, the fuel will burn steadily for a microsecond anyway, millisecond, one or the other. But it will burn and expand at a rate which we could actually monitor rather than just a bang explosion. The problem is if I have that detonation and the piston is up at the top, then it just explodes maximum pressure, and as the piston begins to go down, of course, the volume in the cylinder expands and the pressure drops off rapidly. But if I have a little bit of a continuing expansion, burn of the fuel, then as the piston even starts down, pushing its force through the connector rod onto the crankshaft, I can actually get a continuous pressure. Imagine it like this. I take the heel of my hand and I hit a door. Well, the first impact, and then the door glides towards its closing. That would be a detonation. But if I put the heel of my hand against the door and then I lean forward and push it all the way until it hits the door jamb, that would be an even burn. So what we want out of the fuel is for it to burn and provide continuous pressure against that piston as it goes down. If I just have detonation, I get one pulse of pressure and then it drops off rapidly, and I won't have much power at all. In fact, torque is developed more by the longer that pressure can push against that piston before it backs off, because remember that connector rod goes down and connects to what we would call a landing spot on the crankshaft, which is accentuated to one side or the other. So imagine it's like taking a wrench in your hand and twisting it against a bolt. If I just grab the wrench and hit it with my hand and stop, then I didn't get very far. But if I push on the bolt and continue pressure hard, then it goes down. So, in other words, slower burn gives me more power and more torque. So now we come back to, is it better to run the high octane? Sounds like I've just convinced you that you should run the highest octane possible and get the best operation possible. Well, the problem is timing of when that spark plug ignites has a great amount to do with when that gas in the chamber is igniting and when it's reaching maximum pressure and when it's not. So if I have advanced timing, the spark plug is igniting it before it gets to top dead center. If I have retarded timing, then it's after top dead center. So anyway, the designers, those guys that design all this stuff, they put into that computer that it expects a certain octane fuel, and then they time it to match that fuel. Well, turns out with 87 octane, you're going to get a knock. So now we put in these engines what's called a knock sensor. And that knock sensor listens for the right level of knock, and it adjusts the timing of the engine to achieve that. Now, if you come along and put an 89, 91, or 93 in, and it can't hear the knock it's looking for, it continues to change the timing. And unfortunately, most of the time it will retard it more and more and more, looking for that knock until it's far enough out of time that you're not developing good power, your fuel economy is disappearing, and the engine's not running well. So, point being that some computer systems and engines are designed to accept a greater variation and adjust for it. Some aren't. So it is possible in a particular car you could go from 87 to 89 and see an improvement. In another model and make with a different computer system, you might go to 87, go up to 89, and actually not get a performance that you're looking for. But I will tell you this, in those vehicles that are designed to run on 91 or 93 octane, if you drop down to 87, you will get poor performance. They're designed for high octane for a reason. They have higher compression ratios. Remember, I'm trying to control this burn, this rate of burn. The higher the level of compression, the more quickly it's going to try to detonate. So if I do not have high octane fuel in a high compression engine, I will be running around with detonation all the time. So, okay, we call this School of the Radio on what is octane and how does it work. But what it means to you is that most of the time you stick with what the manufacturer designed into that car and is in your owner's manual. But here's the other, wild card in all of this. Sometimes where you go to buy fuel, because anytime you test something, remember the government can only call for the best testing we can do, and there's always a plus or minus of how accurate the testing is. So you could be buying an 87 octane fuel sometimes and be getting about an 85 or an 84. So sometimes what you have to do is make sure you're getting good quality fuel that actually is meeting an 87. You say, well, how in the world would you know that? Well, I'll tell you. What you got to do is this. You got to figure that some of these guys really are telling the truth. I'm not going to name these brands. I'm not going to advertise for them. But some of these companies do make better gasoline than the others. And so if you get a chance and you purchase from those guys, then there's a good chance you'll get better fuel. Now, that being said, here in Orlando, and you can check me out on this. You can go check me out on this if you want. We have a pipeline that runs from Tampa to Taft. And all the gasoline that comes into Taft and gets distributed in the Orlando area comes through that pipeline. Now, best I can figure out, it's not leased or rented by a particular company for a particular amount of time. All the fuel comes through that pipeline, gets delivered to the tank farm in Taft, and the trucks pull up and they deliver it to all the different name brand gas stations around town. So I would have to say that the gas in Central Florida is virtually all the same. Now, they will put additives in. They will load into that tanker truck 5 or 10 gallons of particular additives that a gasoline company requires to be put into their gas. So it's not that, but the base of the gas. So you might ask, how in the world do I get from the same pipeline the variety of octanes that I get? They're called Octane Additives, and it means that they actually have to put additives into these fuels to change their octane rating. It's not true that high-octane fuel is more highly refined than low-octane fuel. It could have been, but it's not, because it all comes in the same pipe, and it depends upon the additives that you put into it to change the octane rating. So I think I've probably taken the whole segment rolling along here. We must be pretty close to another break. So that's a story on octane. And when we come back, I'll look for your calls, and we'll talk some about oil. So give me a call at 407-674-1025 or 855-545-1025. And this is Dan Watson, back with another segment of Car Time Radio. Sitting in for Jay Zimbauer today. Jay will be back next week, so save those mechanical questions for him. I am a lubrication specialist and got off into talking about octane ratings and how they might affect you and how you might use them in your cars in the last segment, which makes me think that I should probably differentiate between octane for gas and cetane for diesel. Cetane ratings are just the opposite. How easily will the diesel ignite? Now, why would you have these things different and opposite like this? Well, because in the gasoline engine, you're going to force the burn or the detonation by that spark plug firing. It's what's going to set the fuel off. But in diesel, it's going to be what's called compression ignition, from as that piston comes up and it really starts to compress that gas volume till it reaches a certain pressure. That means it reaches a high enough temperature, and then the injector high pressures that diesel into that very, very hot compressed air, and it has to set it off. So in cetane ratings, the higher the cetane rating, the quicker the fuel will ignite, which is quite similar, almost the same theory as advancing your timing. If you have a higher cetane rated fuel in diesel, that diesel will ignite quicker and apply the power like advancing the timing in a gasoline engine. So anyway, I wanted to make sure that I didn't leave people thinking it's the same in both of those applications, because it's not. Fortunately, it's just opposite. So when you buy diesel, you're looking for cetane, number 2 diesel, running around 40 to 45 cetane, and number 1 diesel usually is up around 50 cetane rating. So we won't go much further into diesels, but what we are going to talk about is a question that we got during the break, and that is, if you've got 5W30 in your car and you need some oil and you have some 10W40 in your trunk, can you mix those oils? Can you pour that 1040 into that 530, and will you have any problem? And the answer is no. The oils are not going to have any problem. They'll just mix right together. And many times the additives that are in the oil are the same in the 530 that are in the 1040. Just the viscosity or the thickness of the oil is a little different. So you will change the final viscosity from whatever that, if you had 5 quarts of 530 in the engine and it's down to 4 quarts, and you put in a 1040 quart into those 4 quarts of 530, you'll probably still have 530, but it'll be very close to the top end of the 530 viscosity range, because you're mixing, two things of different thicknesses together. Same thing if you had 1540 in your diesel, and all you could get was some 5W30 or 10W30 diesel oil, and you were down a quart, it'll completely mix without any problem, but you will end up with a little bit thinner full body of oil than what you had before. Now, one of the things that you want to remember is that you need to mix motor oil to motor oil. Don't be mixing transmission fluid and motor oil or gear lube and motor oil or those kind of things, because those oils are tailored and designed for different applications, and it's simply not compatible to try to pour some gear lube into your motor to fill it back up. That wouldn't work for you very well at all, okay? So as long as you're sticking with motor oil to motor oil, you'll probably be okay. You wouldn't want to put too much gasoline, straight gasoline motor oil into your diesel. You could get by with a quart out of the 10 or 12, 15 quarts that are in there. That wouldn't be a big deal. But not much more than that, because there are insufficient additives in the gasoline oil to handle the byproducts of diesel combustion. So that would be one place. Now, you could put the diesel oil into the gasoline engine. It'd be an overkill in most cases. And these days, you have to be a little bit concerned about using just any oil in your motorcycle, because automotive oils don't have enough zinc and phosphorus in them to take care of motorcycle applications. So you need to get a real motorcycle oil and make sure that you're getting the right one. Okay, so that I wanted to clear up on the cetane and the octane and the question about mixing. And now, let's see, didn't you have another question? I'm talking to my producer. He's the one that asked the question about mixing the oils, and I thought he had one more question.
How does a car use oil if you can't see it leaking or you can't smell it burning?
That was a good question. I did not want to overlook that one, because that's a good question. Sometimes the consumption of oil, when you see no leakage and your car is running really well and you're not really sure why you're consuming oil, and in the crankcase, a lot of times you're going to have a certain amount of oil vapor because oil gets really hot. There's some vapor in the crankcase. But we have a device on the engine, the positive crankcase ventilation valve, PCV valve. That valve is designed to open when there's positive pressure in the crankcase. And what that will do then is when it opens, it takes that vapor and jams it into the intake of the engine. Now, at a light rate, especially modern oils, they'll burn clean enough you won't see much smoke because it's just a gradual burn. If it's a good synthetic, you won't see any because they burn smokeless. So you seem to be oil's disappearing and you don't know why. Well, it comes back to, why is the crankcase pressurized? It's pressurized usually because of a certain amount of blow-by going past the rings and causing that pressure to build up in the crankcase. So depending upon a vehicle's age and so forth, you may go up one grade in oil in order to get a better ring seal and stop the blow-by from pressurizing the crankcase. Now, sometimes you have stuck rings. It's not unusual at all in vehicles that have 100,000 miles on them to have some stuck rings, because the petroleum oil does the best it can, but it gets trapped up in those rings, and under high temperature it gradually builds up a really sticky sort of sludge, and then that ring gets stuck in one position. Well, rings are supposed to free float on the piston, not stick. And when they stick like that, they end up not maintaining a perfect seal going up and down the piston, with the piston up and down through the cylinder, and some blow-by will get past them. So many times when you come in with one of these really high-quality synthetics, especially if they have ester in the formula, like the Amsoil synthetics, and it will clean those rings out. It'll literally clean them back out, free the rings, and then that blow-by will disappear. Now, there are some, mild, I call them, because you don't want a really harsh engine flush. There are some engine flushes that you could run through the engine, and it, too, would clean up those rings. There's some different ways to do it. But when you have the invisible oil consumption, that's usually what's going on, is it's just simply opening the PCV. Now, the other thing is, though, the PCV could be stuck open. Doesn't have to be open. It should only open when there's positive pressure. They're very cheap, $2 to $3 for a PCV valve. Very easy to replace yourself. Just go into the parts store, get the PCV valve for your car, and replace it. And then if it was a stuck PCV valve, then now you at least know you've taken care of that. But if it wasn't, then the new one just opens up and starts venting the vapors into the intake of the engine, then you won't know it, but you'll continue to consume oil. So first thing, if you're really consuming it like that and you're not sure what's going on, try going from a up one grade of oil, from a 30 to a 40 weight. That might start eliminating some of that problem. And the other thing is, I would just advise you to get to a really high detergent, high cleaning synthetic oil that will clean those rings out. So I think we're up against our last break. We're going to go pay some bills, and we'll come back with your questions. And Dan Watson here with the last segment of Car Time Radio. Still got a chance to answer a call or two if you've got a minute to call me, 407-674-1025, or toll free 855-545-1025, talking about oil, lubrication, filtration, those kind of things. And we talked some about octane and cetane boost during the show. I had some questions recently about two-stroke oil, which I think is worth just mentioning. You're going to see a lot of two-stroke oil that's going to have different ratings on it, and you wonder what is going on, why these different ratings. Well, TCW3, that's two-stroke watercraft outboard motors that are cooled with water. Now, those motors, really the truth is, you can't hardly get them to run hot. You have to put thermostats in them to cut the cooling water out of them so that you can get them up to some kind of temperature. So the TCW3 oils are designed to run at cool temperatures. Your weed whacker uses TC2 oil, which is designed to run at very high temperatures, air-cooled. So when you're looking at two-stroke oils, buy the ones that are actually rated for your application. Don't try to cross them over. Also, you're going to see oils that are called low ash or no ash. And what that means is that they don't have a lot of zinc and phosphorus in them, and you don't want a lot of zinc and phosphorus in two-stroke oil because what it does, it ends up protecting the moving parts, but then it provides a great place for carbon to stick onto the zinc when it plates out in different places, and you carbon up the engine. So low ash oils are what's called for in almost all the new equipment. So let me go to this call and see what Bob has going on. Bob, what can I do for you?
Hey, is it Don?
This is Dan.
Dan, I'm sorry, Dan. I'm enjoying your program. I've got a 04 Cummins turbo diesel.
Oh, yeah.
Now, it's got almost 340,000 miles on it. And I've only ever used Rotella 15W40 in it, non-synthetic.
Mm-hmm.
And I only change it about every 8 to 12,000 miles.
Okay.
As the manual says, 15 is the normal service interval. It takes so much oil, 13.5 quarts, that I don't want to change it every 3,000.
No, don't do that.
I got to tell you, it's never burnt an ounce of oil. Every time I've ever checked it, it's been right up to the mark.
Well, Cummins, obviously at 350,000 miles, I think you've probably just passed through the break-in period. Those engines, usually what they'll do is wear out the driver before they wear out. In other words, you finally decide after driving the truck for 20 years and 1 million miles that you just got to have a new truck. You don't care. You can't wait any longer for that one to break down.
Well, the driver's seat is getting a little tired.
Yeah, that's right. So sooner or later, something, the radio goes bad or something, because if you're waiting on the Cummins engine to break down, it's going to be there when the truck is long gone. So,
oh, that's beautiful. That's what I'm looking for.
Yeah, it's a those are the heaviest duty commercial grade when you're getting into that original 5.9 liter Cummins turbo diesel. Now, the one good thing in your situation is that yours is not the new 6.7, and
yes,
your diesel is not a 2007 or later model, so that you have to enjoy the diesel particulate filters and the regeneration cycles and the new urea tanks and everything else that's going on that has come about because of the government intervention. Yours is a dynamite to keep. That's I believe that's the 24-valve heavy-duty Cummins 5.9. Right.
325 horsepower, 610 foot-pounds.
What
I have done, I've always used Anodyne fuel additive religiously with every fuel fill-up.
Well, you're doing the right things. Now, what I would tell you is everybody swears by Shell Rotella T. It's a very good diesel oil. Now, if you get tired of changing it as often and you want to go ahead and run 15, 20,000 miles, then we'd sell you an excellent synthetic diesel oil from Amsoil. Been doing it since 1974. So there's nothing in
would that be the same weight? Would that be 1540 as well?
Yeah, it's a 1540 heavy-duty diesel oil. And the biggest difference is that when you go to the synthetic, there's one reason that synthetic would be recommended over the petroleum oil in your engine. And it's not the engine, it's the turbocharger. Turbos, as you know.
It's original also.
Yeah. Still. And as you know, with turbos, one side sits on the exhaust side and the other side pumps air. And unfortunately, that's why a lot of these trucks have an extra thing, the EGT monitor, so that you can look at exhaust gas temperatures, because turbos get extremely hot. And the one advantage that the synthetics have over the petroleums is just physics. They can stand about twice the temperature before they give it up. And
twice. Wow.
Yeah, so you can get up to 600 degrees in the turbo on oil. And the fact is, it's pumped through there really pretty fast, and that's what protects that petroleum from getting in trouble. But there isn't a turbocharged diesel or gasoline engine in the world that is not better served by using a true synthetic base stock oil. It's the reason why every jet engine uses synthetics, is because if it gets away from you for just a couple of minutes, it's toast or it's not. And
that's real important in the jet. Very important.
Absolutely. And so that turbo is similar to the same thing. As long as the world's going fine and it doesn't just run into a situation where for some reason the temperature really builds up, the world's all happy. If it does, that's the one time you'd say, boy, that saved me, $2,500 in a turbo because I had a synthetic engine oil in rather than a petroleum. I'm sure glad I had that, right? But it's an afterthought most of the time. Most people say, I wish I had have had that in. So, listen, if you want to check out my website, thelubepage.com, there's a lot of stuff. And then I got another one called Max.
Can you say that again?
It's lubepage.com. That's my oil one. Now, there's one you would enjoy, which is called Max Torque, MAXXTORQUE.com. That's my diesel truck website, and you find all kinds of interesting stuff on that one.
Okay. Hey, just as a side note, I just quick comment. I only use 100 avgas in my lawn equipment.
Yeah, the biggest thing there is you're staying away from ethanol in that lawn equipment. So, listen, we're out of time. I'd love this conversation to go on, but I'm flat out of time. So, hey, folks, been another good day, good time, and enjoyed your calls. So until next time, just keep rolling.